Today we are fortunate to have a very learned professor from University of Spain, Professor Asun Valera Lopez, and she did her PhD from the best university in the world, Harvard University, and she is also teaching at the best university in Spain, University of Spain, University of Madrid. Madrid. So please welcome Professor Asun Lopez. And we met 2 times, and finally somehow we managed her schedule in Indian itinerary. Thank you once again. Please welcome.
Thank you so much for being here today. I know that the lecture was rescheduled and you had to come at a different time, so thank you very much for joining us. And I would like to thank, of course, Professor Rag for inviting me and the One Asia Foundation, who is funding the program. And I'm very happy to see the investment also from the Korean embassy and the Korea. You have a beautiful room and beautiful setting. Today I'm going to tell you a little bit about the research program that I run in Madrid, and where we work on semiotics and from cross-cultural communication. The reason why I picked this topic is because I think it will be closer to the kind of things that you might find useful. You're all students of Korean studies, and I normally teach comparative literature, cross-cultural studies, and it might be very far from what you're actually normally learning. So this, I think, maybe hopefully you find useful. So, anybody knows what semiotics is? The term semiotics. You know what semiotics is? No? It's the study of signs. There are different types of signs, not just verbal ones, but we have like communication through gestures, through symbols, and so on. So this is a little bit of the basics of semiotics and how we can use that to communicate in cross-cultural environments. Why is it so important? And this is the research program that we have. It's called SIM, S-I-I-M, and if you Google this SIM, you can find the different projects that we have had, funded by different institutions. Among them, the One Asia Foundation as well. I have the same program that Professor Rag has. I have in Madrid. Okay, so communication is about making connections. It's as simple as that. And everything in life is about making connections actually. This is the reason why I put the DNA there, because there are many things in the world that work by repeating certain structures. This happens at the physical level, the biological level, like DNA, but also at the communication level. Okay? And these repetitions are created by analogy. So analogies, similarities. Okay? And the introduction of digital communication has created more complex forms of communication, because to the analogical we have added the digital, the mathematical, 1 and zeros. Okay? Right, so what is communication? We have several levels of communication. The first level is a level in which we absorb information from the environment. And we call this multimodality. Our brain uses multimodal forms of information. So we use all the senses to create concepts in our brains. So for example, when we store in our brain the concept of an apple, we store it with all the attributes, the smell, the size, the different colors that an apple can have, also emotional aspects of when we tasted the apple for the first time. So this is why they say that first times are very important in every way, because they are really strongly remembered more than any other time after that. So of course repetition is also important. Okay. If you've noticed, we have the 5 senses, but there's one more. Anybody can tell me what this one is? It's the sixth sense, no? Which is what? It's not based on perception.
Intuition.
It's not something that you can hear, that you can smell, that you can touch. It's
Intuition.
intuition, imagination, religion, emotions. It's anything that is non-rational, that it's abstract, difficult to describe, okay? And it works on what we call in mathematics, I have a background in mathematics, physics actually. We call it a projection. So we use information from the past and from the present, and we make a prediction. This is how intuition works and how emotional communication works. You make a prediction, and sometimes it's a non-rational prediction, but you still make it. You don't even know why you want to try to guess and do this because you follow your heart or you don't understand what you want to do. You know? So this one, it's, as I said, it relies on non-rational, non-categorical ways of thinking, and it's emotional, affections, religion, faith, all imagination, intuition, all those are there in that one. So we have well, several communication levels. The physical, which is, for example, the medium that we use to send information. This is why I had, sorry, I had this one, different medium. And depending on the media that we use, the material is different. So for example, when I'm communicating with you through my voice, the way you're hearing me is because I create waves that reach your ear and you decode this information. You know? But if we are doing a sculpture or if we are writing, we have different ways of doing this. No? So it's important to remember that the medium is also, it also has an impact on communication. So the physical level, which includes the medium. Then we have the linguistic or categorical level. So we need a code, we need some kind of symbols that carry the information, okay? And sometimes much of this information takes the form of metaphors. In other words, for example, just to give you an example, things like love, or for example, things like time, they are abstract. They cannot be explained in physical terms. So we use metaphors. For example, for time, in any language in the world, we use a space. We use spatial metaphors. So for example, in English, we say like, how long have you been here? So we use expressions related to space. And we're talking about time, but because time is an abstract. And the same happens with things like, for example, love. How do we express love? So in some cultures, love is here in the heart. In other cultures, love is in the head. So that is, the metaphorical level can also be cultural. Okay? So there are some similarities, but there are also differences. So how does cognition, how do we know about the world? cognition is how do we know about the world? Well, we use first sense perception, then we process this information in the brain. And this is more or less the ranking that we follow. So a very important one is attention. How do we get attention in communication? And for example, people who are doing marketing, they know this very well. We're going to do a little test. Well, this is more or less the structure that we follow in the brain. No? So we have perception, sensory input, and then we select. But attention is fundamental. If we are not interested in whatever is being communicated, we're not going to process this information. Okay? And the focus of my lecture today, and we will play a little game of cards in a minute, is this one, emotion. How emotion, remember, it was linked to the sixth sense. The sixth sense, that sense that is difficult to describe, no? And it's very, very important in cross-cultural communication, because without language, you can connect with people without speaking, without any language. So this is what we're going to try and show today. So let's see how attention works, okay? So we play a little game, and I want you to tell me which is the first thing that you look at in this slide. Do you look at the pictures? Did you see the writing? Anybody saw the writing?
Yes.
Which is the first thing that you saw? Anybody saw the writing first?
No.
Nobody. Everybody saw the pictures first. Okay, normally this is the case in all cultures. And we will see which pictures first. But normally in all cultures people tend to see the images because why? Do you know why? There are different types of signs. Remember, we're talking about semiotics. And there are at least 3 types of signs. The symbols are the writing ones, the one that we use for discourse. These are called symbols. They're abstract. But images are called icons, and they have a similarity with the real world. So they reach us, and we don't have to make any effort to decode this information. So this is why normally images are easier. Which images did you see first? Jasmine and the question mark. Everybody says this in any culture. Do you know why? What are the reasons why we saw Jasmine and the question mark first?
No, because the number of questions mark in this picture is comparatively high, and it means that is there.
Okay, first reason. We see things that are in the center, towards the center of the image. They're at the top a little bit, but they are in the center more or less. We see things that have similarity with the real. So if they're abstract things like this kind of diagrams, no. We are trained to see face, to locate faces. It doesn't matter if the face is a cartoon. It's still a face, and our brain processes immediately. It's a face. It's a human face. And another reason why, repetition of the image, like you said. You know, it is repeated, and it's in color. Which colors reach us first? Red, yellow. Why?
These are primary colors.
They have a shorter wavelength. They reach the eye quicker. So it's physiological. It's going to happen in any culture. And another thing that people design in web pages know is that attention is caught by movement. If we have an image that is still, after a while we're not gonna take any notice. That's why, you know, when we are getting the adverts on the screens in the mobile phones, they flash and do things like that because they notice that it's got by colors, strong colors, and movement. And they say that even when someone walks into a room, we're not conscious, but the first thing we do is locate where things are. It doesn't matter if they're people or things, we first locate where they are, and if something is moving, it's the first thing we see, with the corner of the eye, just in case it comes and hits us. It's like a survival mechanism. So movement is something that it immediately catches the eye, and then of course colors, also the sizes, if they are big, and if it's in the center of our vision as well. So these are some of the keys for communication as well. You know, I mean, it's important when you want to go to an interview or you want a job or something, the way you're dressed, the way you're moving, and the way you connect, the way you create the first impression. And that is in any culture, it's universal. Okay, so these are some of the basic things. This is just how the brain scans the whole thing. If you're interested, I could send Professor Rag the whole PPT. Okay, so this is the guy that he's one of the most important exponents of semiotics. First, he was a logician, actually, working also on mathematical languages in Harvard University. And he distinguished what I told you between three types of signs: symbols, indexes, and icons. Images are icons, but also metaphors are icons. Okay, so our brain transforms everything, any kind of information, into images, mental images. They call this, they use a German term for this, it's called Gestalt psychology. Gestalt in German means image. And for example, maps, diagrams, they are also icons. They have a similarity with the real. Okay? Symbols are completely abstract, there's no connection, so it's the writing systems. You know, you need to learn that language to be able to understand it. Otherwise, if this was written in, say, I don't know, Vietnamese, if we don't know the Vietnamese language, we wouldn't understand anything. We wouldn't even know what language it was there. And I'm going to say a little bit about indexes, because indexes are very, very important. The first thing I'm going to ask you is, which of these types of signs do you think are the first ones that we acquired?
That is images. Images.
Images? You think?
Images, diagrams.
Probably images for ourselves, you know, we begin to form mental images. But when it comes to communication, which are the ones that we use first?
Symbols.
You think symbols? Symbols are the ones related to speech and writing, okay?
No, that movements. Movements.
Gestures. Gestures are the first ones that we're going to use. Why do you think that is called indexes? This is the index finger. Indexes, okay? So pointing, they are also called pointers. Indexes are also called pointers. Examples of indexes, besides this one. The very, very first ones that we learn as a child, as a baby. Eye contact. You said eye contact? Eye contact, fundamental. To create what kind of emotions with eye contact? Trust, for example. But does it work in all cultures? In India and Spain, probably yes. I don't know about Korea. In Japan, no. if you have someone who has a very high authority, you never look at the person in the eye. You go like this and you look down. So these are things that you need to learn when you're learning cross-cultural communication. It's important because you could, in Spain, we are very similar to India. And we think, we, for example, people touch a lot, and space between people is closer, and there's no problem. And people look at each other in the face, in the eyes. But if you go to China, you go to Japan, you can't be that close to people. So there are cultural differences there. Right, so that's a pointer. So communication is intersubjective because it's just not about me, it's about me and about the others. If you've noticed, it's a very complex process because here they're all trying to look at this, okay? But in order to look at this, they're also looking at him pointing. Some of the children are looking at him pointing, and at the same time they're looking at what he is pointing. So you need to be like a driver in Delhi. You need to be aware of where everything is happening, So, and it's difficult. Okay, so these are examples of pointers. This is the Spanish dance, which is Sevillanas, and there's normally four. It's a dance made of four. It's a composition of four kind of dances, and it tells a story. They tell a story. They tell a story of flirting, actually. So the people are dancing and they cross each other, and the more in the fourth movement, the crossing, the lady and the man is normal. It's very old-fashioned, so it's assumed that it's a girl and a man. But of course, nowadays it could be two men or two women, and they get closer and closer, as the dancing goes on. You also have these kind of things in India. You use a lot of indexing in dancing, and your dancing. I did some Bollywood some years ago. That's why I know some of the mudras and stuff, and they have meanings. So the whole story of the dance speaks through gestures. So indexes are very important. Besides eye contact, other types of indexes that we acquire when we are babies. Smiling. And it's contagious. You smile, and then almost unconsciously, the other person also smiles. And any other examples of baby talk through indexes? Crying. That's through audio, yes. The baby cries, and we don't know whether he's hungry, she's dirty, or what's wrong, but something's wrong. So these are different types of indexes, and they are the most basic ones. In language, we also have them, okay? We also have indexes in language. How do we translate indexes in language? Do you know? The person who speaks, the subject, the person who is addressed, the object, and also the whole situation, the adverbs of time and space, like here, or tomorrow I will meet you in the university. In the university, that is an index. Where? So indexes are translated into language. Okay. What happens online? This is a project by this woman called Annie Abrahams. She's one of the pioneers in what is called electronic literature. And this is a performance. She's trying to text. The project is called On Collaboration. And she has 6 people collaborating online using the webcam. And what do you think is the outcome of this project? Do you think that collaboration through the webcam can be as efficient as face-to-face? No? It's more complicated, no? Why?
Because artificial elements are there.
Artificial elements are there, and also we don't see all the, we don't have all the signs. We don't have all the signs. Like even the clothes are signs. The way the person is dressed, the way the person moves, everything tells about me. The way I behave, you get all this information about me just because you can see all of me. But she was doing this and she found out that, you know, it's interesting when you look at it because the eyes are like lost. They don't know where they're looking. Because of course they're trying to look at the other person, but at the same time, remember when we're doing Skype or we're doing webcam with somebody else, we're also looking at ourselves. We're conscious of what we look like and then looking at the other person. So when you look at the eyes, they're a little bit lost. So this is what she tries to capture in this experiment, that communication face-to-face is no doubt the most complete form of communication that there is. But because of that, you have to be very careful when it comes to an interview, for example. You know, because if the other person is trained to observe, like for example, I'm a very good semiotician and I have very high what is called emotional intelligence. So from the way you move, the way you behave, I can tell about your personality like this. And some people, like the marketing manager, whoever is giving you the interview, if they know these tricks, then you know you are caught. So it's important. So this is an example of how, very quick one, of how things change depending on the medium, okay? This is a novel by Alan Davison. Anybody knows about it? Yes? He's a Marvel illustrator. He's very famous. He illustrates for Marvel. And it turns out this guy is also a martial art expert. But guess what? He was born spina bifida. You know what spina bifida is? He couldn't walk. His legs were, you know. So imagine he trained himself to walk, and if you look in Google and YouTube, you can see his videos, and he became a martial arts expert. So it's quite an achievement, you know? But he wrote his autobiography, and it's called The Spiral Cage, and he uses, of course, cartoons, and it's from the 80s, and it's a very interesting cartoon. It's a comic, because it subverts the idea of the traditional comic. You know, in the traditional comic, we have like this superhero who is good looking, perfect, very strong. So he is the superhero, but he is a superhero with a handicap. So it's quite an interesting novel. And also in the way that he tries to connect with the, in the way he tries to connect with the reader through using indexes. He uses eye contact to try and create a sense of empathy in the reader. You understand empathy, or sympathy, no? To be able to he tries to make us feel his situation, you know, so that we can actually feel how difficult it is for him to be in that caught from which he cannot get out. That's why the story is called The Spiral Cage, you know. It's like a cage, he can't get out because his legs are not supporting him. You know? So it's interesting because a lot of the story is not read in the traditional way. That's another thing that now neuroscientists have discovered, that because of the, you know, have you heard about the mirror neurons? Mirror neurons, they copy information from one perceptual aspect of the brain to another. So they have discovered that as we learn to walk, we also learn to speak. So there's connection between movement, walking and movement, because speech is really a linkage between cause and effect. So it's a kind of a movement. We tell stories. And they discovered that there is this relationship between learning to walk or to move and learning to speak. Children learn both at the same time. No? So it's interesting to show, he wants to show that in his case, this development is not linear. It's not like in semiotics they have explored that it's normally a line, okay? But for him it's not. It's based on a different category. And if you notice, how do you read this?
The first picture, he is waking up.
He's,
This top to bottom.
yeah, which is an unusual way of reading. For most, I mean, maybe not in ancient China or probably Korea.
In Korean also we
they
used
also,
to
no?
top to bottom.
So if you're used to that, maybe it's easier to read. But if you're not used to it, you need to think, where does the reading start? No? And again, he uses eye contact, if you've noticed, you know, to create this idea of achievement and connect with the audience. No? So I wanted to give you those examples. So I also mentioned about the analogies, that we use analogies for everything to make connections. This is another example from electronic literature. It's called Strings. If you're interested, maybe you can look at this yourselves. It's by an artist called Dan Waber. And he just uses a string and he creates different ways of communication with just a string and using metaphors. But I'm not going to go into it because I have a lot of other things that I want to tell you, and we only have 1 hour. So now we're going to take a little break and we're going to play a game. And then we're going to talk about cultural differences. So this was the first introduction about semiotics and perception and cognition. And now we're going to talk about culture. And we're going to, remember we focused from the beginning on the question of emotions. And of course indexes have a very strong linkages with emotions, you know, eye contact, smiles, they have a strong emotional contact. So the little game is as follows. I'm going to give you 5 cards and you have to work in groups. So maybe 4 or 5 of you together in one table. And they are values, they are emotions and cultural values. And you have to rank them. You have to list, see which one would be more important for you and why you need to discuss with your group, and then we will see what happens. Okay. So I'm going to give you 5 cards each group. If you get any that are the same, let me know. Okay, but you should have 5 different ones. Because I didn't check them. It's not like you're playing cards that have to be. So, it's okay? You have 5 different ones? Okay, so basically you just have to rank. It's not that one person takes one, it's that you discuss and you need to rank them. Which one will be first, which one will be last, okay? And why do you think I'm doing this now? If you have any repeated, you tell me. Why am I to play this game now? In the middle of the lecture. For attention. what is a value? Because there's supposed to be values, no? What is a value?
There are two types of values. One is materialistic value, the second is cultural value. Many type of values can be there.
These ones that that's a point. Yes, these ones are like emotional values, no? Because he's right. There are also like some values. Well, in fact, we have one there that is not so emotional, but anyway, it's more rational. But yes, he's right. They are like related to emotions and affective communication. And what do why are they important? Are they important? Everybody agrees on this. Why? So they make us do things like they are like priority. They set up priorities. No? And sometimes we cannot even tell because values are, we will see later, they are, sorry, this part I already skipped, but values are here. We don't even, we're not conscious of them. They are in the really unconscious part of the brain, no? But they are important. They set our priorities, and sometimes we are not aware of this, no? Right, so how did we rank them? Which group wants to tell me first? So we see if we have any coincidences.
First, there is honesty, then comes responsibility, with that comes trust, and then strategy, and then reconciliation.
Okay, so how many people put honesty first? Okay, so we have a few coincidences there. Any other rankings different? Yes?
Trust.
Trust first. Anybody else put trust first?
We put responsibility.
You put responsibility first. Okay. Conclusions.
Not everyone's priority is the same.
Sorry?
Not everyone's priority is the same.
Not everyone's priority is the same. Any other conclusions? Did you have any difficulty ranking? Why? Because, for example, they have the two together there. Why? They work in clusters. They work in clusters. So, to rank is to actually establish a category. And they don't work like this, they work in groups. So that's why we have difficulty in ranking. Everybody put honestly, responsibility, trust first. Nobody put strategy? Why?
Actually, we could not correlate it with this strategy. It comes with some plan. If we have some plan or work, then we can.
So it's what he was saying, it's more rational rather than emotional. Play the game in China. Guess what? Yes. I don't know in Korea, you tell me. In Korea, I don't know, but in China, I've played in China, and strategy comes first. For everybody, most everybody. So it's amazing, how, they're trained to be more rational and organized, anything they do before they actually do.
Would it have to do with individualism? For example, in China, strategy takes first. So would that have to do with individualism?
That's another thing that we're going to discuss next. Collectivist societies versus individualist societies. The problem is that China, like India, is not really an individualist society. That is interesting. Okay, so this was the little game about values. Any other comments or anything that you wanted to say about it?
How can you correlate strategy and reconciliation?
Strategy and reconciliation.
Oh, I think both fall apart from each
Yeah. Don't ask me because I didn't design the game. But yes, it is true that there are some that are put there, and because honestly, responsibility, trust, immediately they cluster. But the other two, yeah. So I guess maybe they did that to show that some cluster easily and others are part of a different kind of group. Okay. So I don't know why. If you want information, I think you can take a photo of this, of the, this is a group it's a company in the United States, and they came. I invited them actually to the One Asia 2 years ago, and that's how I have the game, because they came and they explained about, they gave a little talk about values and stuff, and I thought it was very useful. And I always use it in the middle of my talk because what I told you, attention is by moving, and you need to move. So when they tell children, the small children, sit down, don't move, that's actually bad, because you need to move to be able to be your mind to be active. If not, you can listen to somebody for so long, but after, in my case, maybe after 40 minutes, like, my mind starts to wander, and I think it's just biological. So that's why it's good to break it and do some activity like that. So may I have the cards back? Thank you so much. And we're going to talk. Yes. Sorry. What is they work in clusters, so there's no sequence. Thank you. Okay, so in the iceberg, what is visible is the behavior. In notice beliefs, what we think, it comes like in the middle. We are convinced that we are like this. We think we know ourselves, but in the end, sometimes we surprise ourselves because we don't fulfill what we say we are, no? So it's this ambiguous territory of belief, no? And values are completely unconscious, so we're not even conscious of this, no? In an effort to be, this is where mindfulness comes in, and all these kind of new theories to try and make us touch ground and really realize what we're like, because when you get to know yourself, then you can establish connection with other people in a much better way. Right, so surface culture is 10%. We said behaviors, tradition, rituals. In India you have so many. And it has to do with doing. The doing again. And then we have like this middle part, the thinking, and this one is complicated because sometimes we think we know something, but we don't know, we're not so. So some values are there, beliefs, priorities, and so on. And then we have deep culture is 90%. This is very similar to language. You know how much what is the percentage of non-verbal communication? 80% non-verbal communication. Imagine, from me, from what I'm saying, you are going to remember probably what I look like and how I make you feel. That's what they say, that people remember about a person, how the person makes them feel. That's nice, no? So you need to try to make people feel good. Right, so the similar thing with culture. So deep culture is very difficult to observe. So you need to be trained to do this, you know. You have, you can do that through body language, like I said, you know, to try and observe people, and body language tells a lot about people. But there are many, many aspects that are part there. Right, so I'm gonna be skipping a little bit because it's 3:15, but I want to go to, maybe I do it here manually. If I go out in yeah, because it's 77 slides. It's for several days, so I have to just give you a summary. So in this one, for example, there are different communication styles, and this has to do with culture. Like, for example, in some cultures, we are direct. In Spain, we're direct. You know, if somebody doesn't like something, they were gonna say it, and it's nothing is covered up. Everything is direct. In Japanese, for example, you need to rely a lot on observing the gestures and wait for the information, because they are very indirect. How about India? Are you direct or indirect?
Both.
Direct?
Amalgamation of both.
You know, for example, in Spain, this means yes and this means no. In China, they can go like this, it doesn't mean yes. They're listening to you, you're selling your product, and they go, and that doesn't mean that you have sold the product. It means that they have heard you, but that doesn't mean that you brought the idea across. And in India, it's so complicated, because when you go like this or like this, you don't know. In the West, they don't know whether they're saying no or they're saying yes. So what, you are direct or indirect?
Both.
Yes? Both? It depends on the area. I mean, India is so big. So I guess it depends, because the culture in India is so different. So, okay. Right, so I want to tell you about two people. Well, this is what we mentioned, about 80% of communication is non-verbal. And for example, this one, you can see, for example, in behavior, the difference between Japanese, American, and Brazilian. For example, silent periods. In Japanese, they can be silent for a long time, and there's no worry. You know, people are together and they don't speak, and it's okay. In American, it's like a middle thing, you know, in the States. In Brazil, it's like in Spain. We cannot be with someone who is not talking, because we get very nervous. Something is wrong. We need to talk all the time. I don't know about India. You tell me. It's okay to be with someone, particularly if you don't know the person. If you're with someone like it's your boyfriend, your girlfriend, and it's okay, you're just sitting there, you don't have to talk. But if it's someone you don't know and you are together or something, for example, in Spain, very uncomfortable situation is always in the lifts or something like this. And people need to find something to say, because they don't like going up in the lift and not talking to a stranger. So they will need to say something. And in England, it's like the weather normally, you know. It's a nice day or it's not a nice day, this kind of thing. In India, can you have silent periods? It's okay?
Yes.
Yes? No problem.
No.
Okay. So you probably maybe in the middle here. How about conversational overlaps? Do people interrupt when they're talking?
Often.
Because in Spain it's like a nightmare. You watch, you know, these debates on television, and people are talking, and everybody interrupts everybody all the time. So you don't even know what's going on, because you watch French television or German, and everybody has like 5 minutes or something to speak, and people respect their time. But in Spain, no, everybody talks at the same time. So in India, it's like that, or?
Yes. Ma'am, because we live in a democratic country now, so
Yeah.
everybody.
And Korea, people respect. So these are differences, no? Facial gazing, what I told you before, eye contact. So Japanese, very low. American, in between. Brazilian, all the Mediterranean countries like Italy, Spain, we need the contact. Otherwise, people get nervous. If you're talking to somebody and you're looking down, not looking at the person is like, what's going on? So, and touching. How about touching in India? You don't touch. Spain, we touch everybody, all the time. And you don't know someone and everybody kisses. Everybody kisses, men, women, and everybody, all the time. So it's like Brazil, very high. But notice how Japanese no and American no. So these are some of the varieties that you can find. And of course, it all depends also on religion, but I don't have time to go into it, okay? But I want to tell you about this guy, whom you may have known, may have heard about him. Hofstede, have you heard about him? In the 90s, it's an old study, okay, but it's interesting because this was done by a guy working for IBM. He was working for IBM and he's asked to go to Asia and check the cultural differences because the company wants to open several branches here in India and China and so on, and they need to be able to know, what are the differences and how to be successful with the company. No? So he established these categories in order to measure the differences. No? One is power distance. So, for example, he said that in India you are very democratic. So that means that you don't have power distance, but you call everybody ma'am and sir. In Spain, my students call me by my first name, Asun. Nobody calls me professor, nobody. Not even from the first day, not even if we don't know each other. They will come to meet me. I am the vice chair, the deputy of the department, the second in command. There's 80 of us in the department, so it's a large department. So I'm the second boss. And the students come to see me and everybody calls me Asu. They don't call me by professor or anything like this. So that will be power distance. There's no power distance in Spain. But in India, I think there is.
Yes.
And in China, huge. And in Korea, I don't know.
So one example is when I was teaching, I had two Brazilian girls. So she used to call Mr. Raj. So I don't have words. And the Koreans were always interjecting why you are calling Professor as Mr. Raj. And then she said, any issue? I don't have any issue, just don't say in front of Koreans.
Yeah.
They will take me like I am taking Korean culture.
Yeah.
So otherwise I don't care.
Yeah. I mean, even in the One Asia, I tend to call the professors because I know in Asia like the power distance is bigger. So I call everybody like Professor Rag, or although sometimes I call him by first name. But everybody calls me Asun, and I tell them because my name is so long and so difficult. So in this way they will remember easier, But I mean, this is power distance. Then we have individualism versus collectivism. And how about India? And China? It used to be collectivist. Do you think it's changing? When he did the test in the 90s, China was still collectivist. It was still like a strong communist influence, but China is changing so much. I mean, they're almost like the United States now, very capitalist oriented. So what do you think about Spain?
Collective, individualism.
In the West, most countries are individualistic, but Spain, no, collectivist. Examples. Some of them are crazy. If someone from Sweden comes to Spain and sees this, they think they are absolutely nuts. For example, in Spain, young people go out drinking together, and very frequently they will buy like a bottle of Coke and then a spirits and mix it up and they pass it around and everybody will drink from the same bottle. And it's a sense of, community building. Someone from Germany or Sweden coming to Spain, seeing this, they say, so unhygienic, no hygiene, they will pick up any disease. How are they drinking from the same bottle? But in Spain, it's like part of the community, you are the part of the group, and you need to do this. So how about India? Do you have this kind of customs? Do you share the same bottle? Yes? Yeah? Another example is, in Spain, if some student in the class is copying in an exam, they will never tell the teacher. Never. Everybody will shut up. In Sweden or Germany, immediately they will say to the teacher, this person is copying. And in Spain, it's considered treason. You are going against the group, you never tell. Even though you are angry because this person is doing something that is not fair, but they will never tell. So in India, will they also cover up?
Both.
Cover up.
Both.
So this is why India and Spain are very, very close in many things. So how about masculinity and femininity? There are some countries that are kind of ruled by men more than women. This is of course changing a lot from when he did the study in the 90s. For example, to give you one example, my husband is from Ireland. Ireland is always ruled by the women in the house. It's like feminine oriented. But Spain, no. Spain is normally like hierarchical, is the father. I think India also, no?
Yes.
So, okay, uncertainty avoidance we have talked about, this idea of the silences and not eye contact and stuff like that makes people uncertain of the communication, and some countries like Spain, for example, they cannot handle this. And then long versus short-term orientation. What do you think this is?
When you make decisions, thinking about effects of your.
So, for example, what do you think about China and Korea? The influence of Confucianism is huge for long-term orientation. Confucian cultures have a sort of a long-term vision. They're more patient. They wait and they know that the results might come later. They will be better results. But of course, capitalist countries normally prefer short-term results. Like in the West, it's normally short-term. Okay? So basically, these are some of the ideas. I think it's almost time, and maybe I should have some time for questions. I just want to give you one of the rankings here. I have two. This one, in which he lists, for example, individualism, and in the 90s measuring this, and of course the number one individualist country is the United States. And every time I go to the United States, I get very nervous, because I go to McDonald's, for example, and you don't ask for chai. You have to say which type of chai, and they have like 5 or 6 different varieties. And you're trying to think which one. Normally, I know the mango one and the lemon one, but then there's many more. And you're trying to decide which type of tea you want, and then the person in the counter is saying, come on, you have a line waiting, make the decision. So it's very, very stressful. Everything, they have so many varieties of everything. You go to the supermarket and you're buying, I don't know, cornflakes, a cereal for breakfast, and there's hundreds of brands by the time you decide which one is the one you want. Because everything is like targeted to each individual. And they call this, when you do the thing for the mobile phones, customization, no? Customized to the street. So it's really individualistic. And well, you will see how, for example, Great Britain and the Nordic countries in Europe are also like that. As you go down, like Spain is not there, but they are less individualistic. And then you have power distance and assertiveness. What is assertiveness? That's another important thing.
Because HDI, I think that depends.
Assertiveness?
If you have the good human.
To push your point, yeah. So, for example, the United States, what do you think? Clear example with the current president.
Trump.
You Trump, you Trump actually, you know, to make your point. You know, they are very assertive and they're taught to be like this. What happens in Asia in general? This is bad manners. You need to be humble. You know, you don't assert like this. In the Western countries, there is also like a little bit of assertiveness, not as much as in the States, no? But of course, this is what sells. And there are studies on this. You know, if you are going to an interview, you need to sound confident in yourself because this is an emotion, and emotions are contagious. So if you are sure of yourself, that's going to come across, and the other person is going to think that, well, this person knows what he or she has to wants. Yeah. But in Asia, that's not always the case. I think that's why I like Asia so much. I like the humble part. You know, I think it's more humane than this assertion. And well, and this is it. This 3:30, and maybe you have some questions or comments.
Do you have any questions?